buildings, I think purposefully vague so that they can maybe expand the scope in the future, but they're trying to not set themselves up to fail at the moment. Part 4 of the bill is concerned with high-risk buildings when they are occupied, and it defines and places duties on accountable person. This is another new term, and also building safety managers, which we will talk about in a bit. And Part 5 introduces a new Homes Ombudsman, provisions for construction products, and also a committee for industry competence with particular regards to architects. So post-Grenfell, we're still seeing this during the inquiry going on at the moment. The regulations made it very difficult to hold any person or organisation to account for the failings in that building. So the new bill ultimately tries to combat this and introduces new duty holders throughout the building's life cycle, from planning right through to occupation. So we've introduced 3 new key gateways, which are planning, construction, occupation or handover stage, and duty holders that are introduced will have legal responsibility during gateway 2 and 3. The new duty holders during construction and refurb phase of the building will be the client, but also principal designer, designers, principal contractor and contractors. All duty holders during design and construction will be required to cooperate and share information with the building safety regulator. They have to ensure compliance with the building regulations and be able to demonstrate how this is being achieved. They must ensure that they and the people they employ are competent to do the work they are undertaking. During gateway 2 and 3, it'll be the client who needs to demonstrate to the building safety regulator that the requirements of the building regulations are being met and risks are being appropriately managed, and ultimately they're going to rely on the principal designer and principal contractor to do this. A building assurance certificate must be issued by the building safety regulator prior to occupation. So this is at the end of the project, and they're demonstrating that yes, building regulations have been met and the certificate has been granted. This is ultimately going to give greater transparency, particularly to residents of buildings, that they know their building is safe and compliant. If we go to the next slide and look at the 3 key gateways, we can talk about each key gateway and discuss the accountable person and building safety manager in more detail in a much more chronological order. So the first gateway, as we said, this is before planning, and this is when the developer would be responsible. This now introduces the fire statement. This is a new thing. It's not the same as the fire strategy. It's much more like a design and access statement. So we're looking at fire and rescue service access, water supply, and also how that building affects any surrounding infrastructure. Interestingly for this, in-scope developments are any development where at least one building is in scope. So it may be a wider development with only one building that's sitting over the 18-metre mark, but a fire statement is required for the development as a whole. This will help local planning when granting planning permission, and also utilise that early engagement to benefit developers. Stage 2, this starts prior to construction, and this is when the duty holders are coming into effect. They must be shown to be competent, prove compliance, but also prove that the products they're using have been adequately tested. The building safety regulator will be responsible for higher risk buildings, as we said, away from local authority building control. They can issue a hard stop if any of the building works are not thought to be compliant. They'll set up a site inspection programme which sets appropriate stages during construction for them to attend site and check that it's compliant. Nobody's sure how they'll manage this because obviously it's a huge task that they're taking on. Also, we've got this change control strategy which will need to be submitted. I think everybody remember from Grenfell that the original cladding that was proposed for the building actually changed at a later date without additional sign-off from building control, and this will move away from that. So if any products, materials, persons or installation is changed, then this will have to be documented in the change control strategy and again signed off by the building safety regulator. At stage 3, we're looking for this handover of the golden thread of information, which I know that Neil is going to talk about shortly. The client, principal designer and principal contractor will also be required to produce and co-sign a final declaration. So this is really emphasising the greater accountability built into the building safety bill. It's the responsibility of the accountable person to register the building for the building assurance certificate. As we've said, the building cannot be occupied until a building assurance certificate has been issued. Interestingly, existing high-rise risk buildings are also going to need this building assurance certificate. So I'm not 100% sure what that's going to look like for social housing providers, local authority housing, where they may have buildings that are not compliant at the moment. Obviously, they're already occupied, but ultimately the safety case report will have to identify what the problems are and how they're dealing with them. So the accountable person, who are they? They're the person with legal responsibility for the building once it's occupied. They're most likely the person who owns the freehold, although it may be more than one person. They'll be registering the building and applying for the certificate, but also they're responsible for this mandatory reporting of structural or fire issues within their building. They'll maintain a safety case report for the building. So this is a document stating that they know what the risks are and this is how they are managed. And it's ultimately going to be a structural and fire risk assessment. The Building Safety Bill introduces this new term, which is building safety risk, and that's structural, fire risk, or other. It's going to build greater redundancy into the system because the accountable person must consider the worst case scenario and how they would mitigate it. For example, introducing an ATS system. The safety case report will be an ever-changing document, and for example, the safety case report should be reviewed in light of industry changes. So for example, when we had the huge balcony fire in Barking, this nowadays would feed straight into the safety case report for every single building that has timber balconies to be learnt from and acted on at that time, rather than waiting for the regulations to play catch up, I guess. So that's a great step forward for us. They'll cooperate with the responsible person under the fire safety order if that's a different person. They also have to implement something called a resident engagement strategy. Again, looking directly at what happened at Grenfell, residents were reporting failings within that building, and unfortunately they went unheard. They will delegate their duties to the building safety manager, who's going to be their day-to-day eyes and ears for that building. So the building safety manager may be a legal entity or an individual. They must be competent to do their role, and to ensure this, they'll have to be registered with the building safety regulator. As I said, this was the day-to-day management that we're looking for from the building safety manager, but also they must understand the safety case report for that building and manage and maintain the building in accordance with both the safety case report and the building assurance certificate. They will be responsible for reporting any safety failings to the accountable person, and the accountable person must report any failings upwards to the building safety regulator. The building safety manager will be tasked with proactively engaging residents through a mandated resident engagement strategy. So it's not just listening to residents, but also giving them a voice and an effective channel to raise any complaints or fears about their building. They must ensure that any maintenance, management employees, ultimately anybody working within that building, is competent to do so. So this is just touching on the mandatory occurrence reporting that actually comes in during Gateway 2 and 3 for all duty holders, and it's compulsory for them to report any structural and fire safety occurrences that could cause a significant risk to the life safety directly to the building safety regulator. It's also, I think, going to be a huge change for contractors who I think in the past have maybe built things just because that's what the design says how it should be built, even though they may have the foresight that it's not necessarily correct. Now actually they will be asked to speak up and say why they don't think it's correct and what the problems may be. All these occurrence reports will be shared by the building safety regulator, so we're definitely looking to move away from siloed working and actually to try and get the whole industry and culture change as a whole. The clear complaints procedures being set up for residents through their engagement strategy, and there's also going to be a channel so that anything that they raise with the building safety manager must be escalated to the accountable person and ultimately to the building safety regulator. In new buildings, this will be via the New Homes Ombudsman. So for any builders responsible for new build homes, they have to register, and then for any residents of new builds, they can make a complaint with the New Homes Ombudsman, and this will be looked at specifically. There's a lot to cover in a short amount of time, so if you have any questions, there's a lot that I haven't quite managed to capture, so please feel free to get in touch afterwards, but if not, over to Neil.
Thank you, Lucy. Very comprehensive overview. So just on the golden thread, in fire safety, do we really want complexity? If you stop and think about this golden thread the government have introduced, I'm sure it's to bring in a measure of simplicity. So if we think of a simple relay race, it's so simple, just one baton passed seamlessly between runners. There's method, even down to when the next runner is receiving the baton. So I think this is what is being brought in, is something that's simple, but does the baton change hands through the race? It's an obvious answer, no it doesn't, but think of how much changes. Lucy's just mentioned about things changing during a project. And I really like this simple analogy of the golden thread, just to apply as we're thinking from a manufacturer of a component to a construction product to an architect or principal designer, that transfer from a principal designer to a principal contractor, and then from the contractor to the client, and maybe the client to a duty holder. So these transfers are taking place, and the dictionary definition, I just wrote it down, of a golden thread is an idea or feature that is present in all parts of something, and it holds it together and gives it value. So just to hone in briefly on one area of the new bill is construction products. There's over 100 references to construction products in the bill, which, as we know, is a very important area. And construction products regulation, it's just important to know that the UK leaving the EU has not abolished construction products regulation, or CPR as we know it. It's neither has it technically changed the harmonised standards that for many years applied to CE mark products, but there are they've been adopted by the UK government and under UK legislation. It's a big subject, and it's probably something more for an expert like Douglas Masterton, or a webinar on its own, which is available. But the UK timeline, until December 21 and end of this year, products placed on the GB market, that's England, Scotland, Wales, can be either CE marked or UKCA marked. And then from January 22, UKCA mark must be applied to the product or its associated instructions, packaging, literature. Back to the golden thread. I think there's 4 key areas of the golden thread, the idea of the golden thread. One is that the information about a building is and its safety is stored. The information is held digitally, and its relevance to the building is there, and it's all kept together. So whenever a duty holder changes, as Lucy's been speaking about, the information is passed on from the outgoing duty holder to the incoming duty holder, and the thread is there to prevent any vital information falling down cracks between parties. One fantastic initiative, which I can't help mentioning, is this idea of storing data using a data tracking pin or an app. Have a look around, and there's options already on the market. For fire doors, for example, digital data storing can really assist the smooth transfer of what we're calling this relay baton. In simple terms, you can upload or download certification test reports onto the product, images of installation, records of maintenance, potential safety concerns, remedials, so on. So it's like a car MOT, but including more detail. So this safety is all recorded and retained throughout the lifetime of the building. I think that's fantastic. So thinking of the golden thread as a relay race in simple terms is can I ask the question to myself in my role, in my organisation, maybe a housing association, am I passing on relevant information to the buildings, and is it kept together, and will it be accessible in the future for the lifetime of the building? So I find a really helpful question. You can find your own, but I really like to ask myself, how confident would I be for my loved ones to live in this in this building or to use this product? Very simple, very powerful question. So try and go away from this presentation today. I'd encourage everyone to look for a value, look for a statement or one phrase that you can apply right across your role or organisation that will absolutely ensure your building safety relay. So at that, I'll hand on to Neil Harrison.
Thanks, Neil. Right, so when it comes to door assemblies, the golden thread tries to ensure the main stages of an assembly's life cycle, so the design, manufacture, installation, and then inspection and maintenance are intertwined. I think the vast majority of companies and individuals who fall into supporting these life cycle stages generally do the right thing. They're transparent with the correct type of evidence, and they hand over what they hold onto the next stage. It has to be like that because, in fact, it's the basis for all third-party certification schemes, regardless of which ones they are. It has been, since long before the phrase golden thread was ever mentioned when we're talking about fire safety. There are inevitably a small minority who may try to involve some bluff and bluster into this and treat compliance more as an option rather than a necessity. Coming from the perspective of a door manufacturer, component supplier, or a systems house, this can't be the case, as what can seem a relatively small or insignificant detail has the potential to snowball and escalate. If you've been watching anything of the Grenfell and Tower inquiry, it's been a significant focus throughout that. So what does this mean for door manufacturers and component suppliers? In the most part, more transparency. Duty holders and accountable persons will need to be satisfied that all the construction products are compliant at each stage. Evidence for compliance needs to be clear, needs to be unambiguous, which can be challenging given the technical nature of fire safety construction products. Okay, so we'll go through some of the information that door manufacturers in particular are likely to be required to provide. So scheme certificates. Often there isn't enough emphasis on what third-party certification actually does and why it should provide the supply chain right the way through to the end users with additional confidence. There are 3 or 4 main third-party certification schemes in the UK. They each follow slightly different rule sets, but the most important element common across all those schemes is scrutiny. Third-party certification isn't a mandatory requirement, although it is recognised within approved documents as providing confidence to building authorities. Manufacturers who voluntarily subscribe to these third-party certification schemes are subjected to regular factory audits, which ensures that the business has things like appropriate quality control measures in place, paperwork's up to date, and records are maintained. Some schemes also require the manufacturer to conduct audit testing, where a door assembly is manufactured under a sampled or witnessed condition and then put to test against the relevant standard. So that brings us on to the next piece of information, fire test reports and smoke test reports. There's been significant focus on test reports since the government's investigation into fire doors. Fire test reports, if matching exactly the door assembly that you've got on site, is a great indicator that the door will resist fire for the required period, and smoke test reports in the same way demonstrate that air leakage is restricted and therefore more likely to restrict the passage of smoke. Test reports, however, only tell one part of the story. For example, what if the report you've been issued with has a door that is a slightly different size, bigger or smaller? The hinges in exactly the same positions? Is the vision panels exactly the same? How do you really know that what you have on site matches the fire test report at all? This is where field of applications and EXAPs can come in. Both of these documents are a form of assessment which considers a number of test reports and brings the results together using expert opinion to produce a scope. Field of applications and EXAPs are all based on primary test evidence and considers things like interchangeability of hinges, vision panel positioning, allowable leaf sizes, as well as practical things that people don't often consider, like decorative finishes and painting and species of timber. As with test reports, there is a risk that presented with this document in isolation for something to be misinterpreted. To lower that risk, ensuring that the document, whether it's a test report, field of application or XAP that you're presented with, is under the scope of a manufacturer's scheme certificate, adds another layer of independent scrutiny. Additionally, for external door sets, it's a mandatory requirement for them to be UKCA or CE marked, depending on where they're being placed in the market. In either case, it means that the testing carried out must be to the relevant European test standards, namely 1634 Part 1 for fire and 1634 Part 3 for smoke. And any collation of test evidence must be done via an XAP. The field of applications or any other form of assessment for that matter is not recognised for European classifications for the purposes of UKCA or CE marking. Other performance characteristics may also be required, and therefore evidence should also be presented. So, for example, approved document M may require a certain width of clear opening or an opening force. Approved document K may require a certain safety rating for the glass within a door leaf, and approved document L may require evidence to support the door assembly's thermal insulation performance. It's important that the evidence for these characteristics match that of the evidence for fire resistance. So a good example of how this can be meshed together is the fire and security dual scope certification schemes. This is an initiative led by Secure by Design, requiring any door assembly needing to demonstrate performance against fire, smoke and security must provide matching test evidence so that each test specimen for each of those characteristics were made up of the same components and the same specification. And additionally, that has to be certificated by the same body. So in particular for the dual scope fire and security, accredited systems of that type are published on the Secure by Design website. Of course, the last bit of information is instructions. How should these door sets be used, installed and maintained? With regards to installation, I'll leave that for Richard to discuss further with you.
Thank you very much, Neil, and good morning, everybody. Installation is regarding on the site, for example, is one of the hot topics at the minute and is picked up very often. Poor installation is unfortunately generally picked up very late on in the build process when the door's painted, the carpets are down, and you're just about to hand over the product to the customer. At this late stage, to rectify poor installation, it can be very costly. What's been recommended for quite a few years to overcome this is third-party installers, which means very similar to a third-party certificated door set, the installer is a member of a third-party certification scheme. The schemes are run very similar to the door set schemes, where the contractor is audited, their paperwork's audited. For example, I've got a contractor at the minute where they are being inspected on every single one of their installation projects, and then also randomly checked during the installation process as well. So it tries to eliminate poor installation there. All the staff are trained, the management are trained, they have to follow guidelines, and they have to check the performance of the door set, the fire certification, and so on and so forth. If you don't go down the third-party certification route, because a lot of joinery companies are very small, they may just have a half a dozen members of staff within that business, you can do one of a few things. There is now an MVQ on installation of fire doors that you can now attend and get a qualification there. A lot of door set manufacturers also provide training on installing door sets. And then also as well, you've got installation instructions from the manufacturers, as well as the fire certification. Those are two very important documents that installation teams should always follow. Just because you fitted one fire rated door set doesn't mean that the next one you fit will be identical. There may be something very specific in that test report or the fire certification or the installation instructions that is different to what you've done in the past. So it is critical. First thing you do before you start installing product, read those documents. Another document that is hardly ever discussed, known about, If you ask any installation company, have you ever heard of BS 8214? The vast bulk of them will say no, never heard of it. 8214 is referred to in 99% of all fire certifications and in installation instructions. It will state something like, for installation, refer to BS 8214. 8214 is full of loads and loads of rarely useful information. The main point being how to seal the gap between the frame and structural opening, the maximum sizes, what materials you use, mastic, fire foam. Yes, it does permit the use of fire foams, but it also stipulates what British standard you test those materials to. So it will be 476 part 22 or 1634 or one of the other test standards as well, which I can never remember. And it also goes through some terminology of door sets as well. So it's a really good training guide to read, to learn terminology of door sets, as well as going through how you label door sets, tag door sets, and things like that as well. Moving on from that, door sets. It is recommended that door sets are purchased, supplied, used. It's not just a sales gimmick to sell your door sets. It is simpler to purchase a door set. If you go down the traditional route of doors and frames separate, then when you buy a door from somewhere and then a frame and then seals and hinges, etc., the site team or whoever's putting those components together has to read the fire certificate. Am I using the right frame material? Am I using the right frame density, the correct intumescent, the correct hinges? Just because a hinge, for example, says it's fire rated may not mean you can use that on your door set. If you look at the fire certification, it may say something very specific like the hinge must have 4 screws. It is as complex as that regarding ironmongery component. Or a concealed closer, for example. The concealed closer may say it is fire rated, but the test report or the fire certification says you cannot use a concealed closer. So you need to make aware of that. Whereas if you purchase a door set, it takes a lot of that away from you. So the door set manufacturer will supply a compliant door frame, a correct intumescent seal, sizes. They may come back to you and say, you can't have this piece of ironmongery, you can't do this, you can do that. And that's where, when we talk about the golden thread at the early stages, that is looked at as well. So hopefully at quotation stage or at the very end of the project, we don't get those kind of issues. Moving on to maintenance and things like that. I've probably spent hours and hours and hours over the years creating operation and maintenance manuals, or O&M manuals for short. O&M manuals are provided by all door set manufacturers, or can be supplied by all door set manufacturers, but very often when these documents are supplied, they are collected by the contractor because you have to do that, or their procedures and processes are done that, but very rarely are they kept afterwards. They may be put in an archive box somewhere or something like that and forgotten about, or somebody retires and the information doesn't get passed along. The operation and maintenance manuals are as equally as important as fitting the door set correctly. You may buy a perfect door set, you install that door set perfectly, but if you don't maintain the door set correctly later on down the line, it will not perform how it should do. Things like the operation and maintenance manual will have things like when you inspect a door. Some of the questions that have been asked prior to the meeting today are, when do I maintain the door? How often do I maintain the door? The operation and maintenance manuals will go through all of those questions. Is it light duty, heavy duty, severe duty? At what stage do I maintain it? 6 months, 12 months, a weekly basis if it's really, really high duty, like in a hospital. It will go through all that information. Things like how to clean the door, don't use abrasive chemicals, how to maintain ironmongery, how to adjust a door closer. It's full of all of these really useful pieces of information that need to be kept, looked after, and the golden thread concept will ensure that that information is visible. So when you come along and do maintenance on the door, for example, a piece of intumescent's fallen out and it needs replacing, that operation and maintenance manual will tell you what material to use. It might be daft, but going back to, like I said, about the ironmongery, all intumescent seals are slightly different from different manufacturers. They've got difficult chemical formulas and things like that. So you must replace it like for like or in accordance with the fire certification. So keeping that O&M manuals, it can be kept digitally nowadays as well as on tracking systems and data systems as well. And the golden thread links everything together. So at day one, you specify the correct product. It goes through all the process, and at the very end, you've still got the information and you know how to maintain your door and everything like that. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I'll pass you back to Rutland.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you all again for joining. And I'm sure you'll all agree that this is an evolving scene, but we'll continue to follow progress of the bill. We'll also continue to share ideas with you all, and Rutland as a company certainly welcomes any new legislation to improve fire safety. We'll now move on to the question and answer session. If anyone wants to stay on the call, then please feel free to do so. And we have got a few questions, or quite a few questions from the attendees, so we'll try and answer as many as possible. And yeah, any that we don't answer, we'll answer afterwards. So if you could remain muted, and if you have any questions, please send through on the chat. So first up, we have a question from Adaban, which is he's in consultancy, and the question is probably for Richard, this one. What is the anticipated fire door inspection regimes for low-rise buildings, listed buildings, especially stock within small registered social landlord?
Yeah, thank you. Like I said a moment ago, it depends on the building size or what type of building it is. Isn't really about when you inspect it, it's the usage of the door. A riser cupboard, for example, will need inspecting far less than the communal door in a stairwell, because you think about it, that door in a stairwell, or it's the main door people walk through all the time to then get divided into their apartments. That door will get used far more than a riser cupboard door, for example. So you would need to maintain that door a lot more. I would refer to the products, like says the operation and maintenance manuals, as that will say when you should inspect it. Roughly, it's every 6 months to 12 months. A very high usage door. Say, for example, it was a hospital project that you was dealing with, and it's one of the main corridors going through the hospital. You would be checking that once a week, once a month at the max, at the minimum, sorry, once a month, because that door will get abused, banged, knocked, and things like that. Regarding a high-rise building, like I said, that communal area door, I would say every 6 months for that communal area door. And it'd be things like, is it damaged? Is it knocked? Is it banged? Does the closer work correctly? And things like that. So it's those checks. There are, if you visit some websites out there now, you can get a format for inspecting products as well. Some of the online systems as well, the data systems also have an inspection list as well. So if you need an inspection list, Google fire door inspection list, and I bet you'll find one somewhere as a template to use. Okay, thank you.
Well, thanks, Richard. That's helpful. We've got a question from Mark, who's a compliance fire safety officer in social housing, and this is probably another one for you, Richard. What are the general fire door inspection frequency, in brackets stages overall, and which building it covers? Also, competency levels of the person conducting each type of requirement, in brackets weekly tests, 6 monthly tests, servicing and repair.
Half of the question I've answered in the previous one. The second half, it's about the competency again, and Lucy mentioned earlier about how you measure competency is a little bit unknown at the minute. But anybody conducting surveys, inspections and things like that, in my opinion, need to know what they're doing. The best way to do that, and it's they need some training of some kind. So for example, become an FDIS inspector to get the training there, go on training courses. You may be time served, so you know what you're dealing with, look at test evidence. It's all about, can you demonstrate, if anything was to ever happen, touch wood it didn't, but if anything was to ever happen, can you demonstrate that you knew what you was talking about? So you can sit there and go, yes, I'm an FDIS inspector, or I'm this, or I'm that. Can you justify what you've said, or can that person justify what they have said, or the business justify what they have said? So it's the competency. It's like Lucy said earlier, at the moment, they haven't decided how to measure the competence of somebody yet. But it's, you know, I mean, if somebody used to be a fishmonger last week and now they're inspecting doors, of course that person isn't going to be competent, you know what I mean? So it's that kind of thing. So you need some kind of training, and that's still to be decided regarding how to measure that at the minute.
Thank you, Richard. Moving on to our third question. This is from Leon, who's a door manufacturer. He has asked, will EN 1634 change as we come out of Europe? Neil, could you answer that one?
Yeah, good question, Leon. It's been asked a lot. EN 16034 is one of the standards referenced in CE mark door sets, and it includes standards such as EN 1634 for fire testing. It hasn't changed, Leon. Basically, the UK government have adopted the European standards, which were harmonised standards, EU harmonised standards, and they've been retermed as designated standards in the UK. So the standard itself technically is exactly the same wording. So it'd be BSEN 16034. If that answers your question.
Thank you. The next question is from Edward, who's a consultant. He's asking, if I use a non-certifier scheme door closer on a certified door, why does the door set lose its certification? Neil Harrison, you'll probably.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, like I said before, there are 3 or 4 main manufacturers schemes in the UK at the moment, and they each have their own different rule set. The certifier scheme is very component driven. So the each individual component, if it has a technical schedule that it can adhere to, it has to be a subscriber to that scheme in order for the items to all be brought together. So, you know, typical door assembly, hinges, door leaf, frame, seals, they all have to be individually certified in order to bring that together. So, you know, if the requirements of the scheme is that all those components are registered under the scheme, and therefore they're only interchangeable provided they're subscribers. There are other schemes that base their certification on full field of applications and things like that, where it's more sort of door set driven or door assembly driven, and individual components don't necessarily have to be subscribed to a different scheme, provided that they have proven it through testing to the relevant standards. So with regards to why does the door set lose its certification, it's because that's the rules of the scheme.
Thank you, Neil. Our next question is from Ewan, who is asking, how will this, as in the draft Building Safety Bill affect principal designers? Lucy, would you be able to help answer that one?
Yeah, thank you. I think we did touch on it during the presentation that obviously we're looking for that greater evidence of competency, the change control strategy, and compliance with the building regulations. With regards to the principal designer role, actually at Franken we're calling this like an enhanced principal designer, more focus obviously on the change control strategy, evidencing competency, but also for them to be checking that people working on the project have the competency to do so. And for me, the biggest change is that conformity statement at the end. They're actually signing that declaration to say that the building or design is compliant with building regulations, and it's building that greater accountability into the system. And I'm hoping that these change control strategy, for example, they'll use then on each and every project and not just the higher risk buildings.
Thank you, Lucy. That's helpful. Yeah, our next question is probably one for Neil Harrison. It's from James, who's a Director Inspection, Compliance and Clerks of Works is his sort of role. Just need confirmation that the door manufacturer's fire test certification supersedes all recommendations, and a third-party warranty post installation can't negate items specified in the test certification, for instance, fixing strategy or incident.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. You know, when we're talking, you know, specifically about the golden thread, when, you know, as a door set manufacturer, if door set manufacturers produce a door set, pass that information on along with the appropriate evidence, certification and instructions for use, then even though there may be another route, you know, there may be an alternative hardware intermittent protection that you could apply, or there may be an option for alternative installation methods to be used, but by not following the manufacturer's guidance, you know, the manufacturer can hold his hands up and cease to take responsibility. So I think it's about keeping hold of that responsibility, and therefore, yeah, you know, if the manufacturer has put forward evidence to say this is the installation method, this is how you put the hardware on, this is the protection that's required for it, going against that would invalidate the certification from a manufacturer's perspective. I think there's potentially routes that if, I don't know, for example, something was going to come up outside of what the manufacturer's guidance was, there's potential for someone else to take responsibility of that door set and bring in some of the items, but that needs to be, you know, it probably has to go through an independent body to have some sort of assessment done or further evidence to be applied. The simplest way is just do what the manufacturer's instructions are.
It's very good, thank you, Neil. Got two questions from one of our attendees, David, who's the FDIS inspector. The first one is, are third-party qualifications going to be required for fire risk reports and fire door inspections? And will the new bill ensure that all trades are required to have third-party accredited training, as there are so many bad or untrained workers out there fitting fire doors? Richard.
Yeah, I don't think they will ever write so it specifically says you must be third-party certificated. I think it will come back again, answering both questions in one. It will come down to the competency again. And it's the same with, I don't think they'll ever write to say you must be third-party certificated installer, you must be a third-party certificated risk assessor or inspector. In both cases, you could be, for example, FDIS accredited, for example, for the inspectors, and then regarding the installer, be third-party certificated. At the end of the day, they're two easy ways of doing it. A lot of people would agree that third-party installation should be mandatory, like gas safe, or I can never remember what the electrical equivalent is nowadays, or the old Corgi setup. There's one for the gas and the electricity company, so why isn't there one for door sets? They're equally as important. I just don't think they'll do it personally. I think they'll just tie it all into the competency of the industry and do it that way instead. So if you can demonstrate competency, then you know what I mean, that will be adequate enough for it, I think.
Very good point. Thank you, Richard. Got one on fire risk assessors, which is probably best for Lucy. Question from Stacey, who's a fire door and passive fire protection specialist. He's saying, I'm keen to get another professional opinion on what's new and what changes can we expect from FRAs. Lucy.
Yeah, thank you. So for fire risk assessors, I think that there's been this huge drive for competency of risk assessors for, well, definitely post Grenfell, but I think in the years before that as well. I think everybody knows from the fire safety order, there wasn't a mandatory requirement for a fire risk assessor to be, or have any defined skills. And that was because it was introduced ultimately to reduce that regulatory burden. So they was trying to encourage people that own small, simple premises to carry out their own fire risk assessment. And they produce these lovely guides to support them. But ultimately in the more complex buildings that fell down because there were people that maybe weren't qualified to carry out a fire risk assessment, and therefore they weren't capturing all the issues in that building. So actually in response to the fire safety bill and not the building safety bill, a lot of people fed back that these competency criteria for fire risk assessors should be fully defined. So that's in the latest public consultation to the fire safety bill. Whether it will be taken forward and adapted in the fire safety order is not clear, but I think definitely the industry as a whole has moved towards the fire risk assessor needing to be a competent person. We've definitely seen at Frankham that all tenders now, they're not just asking for like a group third-party accreditation, so we're BAE for SB 205, but they also want individuals within that scheme to also be individually accredited. And we've seen this national fire risk assessors register that's been published, I think 2 weeks ago. So now that you can look for individuals within that company to make sure that you're definitely getting a competent person to carry out your fire risk assessment.
Well, thank you, Lucy. Got two I'll probably join together, and if Neil, Harrison and Richard could help on these two. Start off with Neil and then followed by Richard. One from Russell, who's an MD at a door manufacturer. We're finding that some third-party fire door assessors are rejecting door installations where gaps are not a consistent 3 mil all round, even though tolerances on the FOA may permit 2 to 4 mil gaps. Who holds the authority in such circumstances? And the second one is, who has inspection and sign-off duties relating to fire door installation? Neil, would you be able to kick it off? Thanks.
Yeah. Ultimately, you know, the responsible person has to, you know, all the weight is on that person's shoulders. So with regards to, you know, whether it's even viable to have a consistent 3 millimeter gap right there around the door set at the point of installation, I'd be interested to see actually what the report was, because most field applications give an element of tolerance. You know, especially on timber door sets, there is an element of movement that can happen as environmental controls are brought in. So yeah, who holds the authority in such circumstances? The responsible person at the end of the day, and whoever they employ to give them advice. I think that works exactly the same for the inspection and you know, duties relating to fire door installation as well. If the responsible person has put a competent person looking at to give authority on that, then that's their prerogative.
Yeah, I completely agree with Neil. It's instances in the past where people are asking for over and above, or they don't fully understand. And like Neil said, with the 3 mil gap, you set it at 3 mil today. 2 days later, because of timber movement, it could be 3.5 mil, or it could be 2.5 mil. It's that's why there's a tolerance, and there's a tolerance in everything. And regarding the inspection, technically everybody should inspect the door. The fitter should have inspected the door when he finished the work and should be happy with it. The contractor should inspect the door to make sure that it's been fitted correctly, because why would you not inspect the door, in my opinion, before you then pay the guy to say he's done a good job, thank you very much. And then generally it gets inspected again by building control, NHBC, etc., etc. And like Neil said, that end person will be the person that will be putting his name against it at the end of the day. So that person should be competent enough to be able to do that. But each stage, it should be inspected by the installation, the contractor, because you're passing it on to the next step. If you don't inspect it and it gets to the very end, like I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, it can be very costly to rectify that mistake. So it benefits all inspecting it at every stage, as well as it being in accordance and the compliance and things like that as well. Thank you.
Very good, thanks, Richard. Probably back to Neil Harrison again. Russell, business development even, and a hardware distributor. Can a door manufacturer provide their fire certificate through a third party if made to their door spec? Neil.
Hi. Yeah, if I'm understanding the question correctly, third-party certification is not mandatory. There is no mandatory requirement. There's no legal obligation to become third-party certified. We've mentioned that a few times. So it is plausible that a manufacturer who does not hold his own certification can manufacture in accordance with someone else's certifiable evidence. The difference is the independence, the additional scrutiny that would be applied to someone who subscribes to such a scheme. So, for example, if I set up a door manufacturers and I wasn't interested in signing up for a certification scheme, I could pick up some evidence and present it to the competent person or responsible person or duty holders along there and say, look, you could say, I'm going to manufacture, I declare that I'm going to manufacture in accordance with this certifiable evidence. What they can't do is they can't infer that they are third party certified by doing so. There isn't a situation, as far as I'm aware, the systems houses, component suppliers, they don't underwrite other people to manufacture under the certification that they may hold. There are processes where people along that supply chain can become certified in accordance with the scheme, and evidence can be cascaded in that way. But you can't. There isn't a situation where there's like, where one certificated person can underwrite someone else's production methods. I think that's what the question means. So that was it.
Thank you, Neil. Very important what you say. And probably, sorry, another one for you again. William, who is a hardwood timber importer, is asking, is your European ash suitable for 60-minute fire doors?
Yeah, right. So there is potential that European ash can be used for 60-minute fire doors, but again, it depends on the control of the timber itself, and depending on which scheme the manufacturer subscribes to. So I think there is, under the certifier scheme, for example, the technical schedule for doors is TS10, and they exclude ash to be included generally, unless there is specific test evidence for that manufacturer to use ash within their system. I'm not 100% right on this, but I think it's to do with the sporadic nature of American ash when it comes to density, there's usually a requirement, you know, especially for 60-minute configurations, for the density to be around about 640 kilograms per cubic meter. And there is definitely, you know, unless you're really on top of it and checking that there's opportunity for ash to come in below that density. So I think that's the reason. But you know, other schemes, other schemes that you could manufacture to allows ash, provided the density is measured and confirmed.
Thank you, Neil. That's good. Nadine, who's at Ironmongery Distributor. What are the changes with regards to door closers and other ironmongery supplied for fire doors? Neil, could you help on that one?
Yeah, I think we'll try to cover that a little bit. For door hardware, door closers, nothing's really changed other than terminology and legislation. The standards are the same. But what will be changing during the year is UKCA marking appearing on products, as manufacturing is come through since Brexit. So that's about the only change you'll see on hardware is UKCA and CE, if it's for both the EU market and the UK market. And that would be my answer.
Thank you. We'll go on to, yeah, there's a couple more. We've got 3 more questions. 2 are for Neil again. It's about doors. So one from Dave, who's a architectural ironmonger. If possible, one grey area that I'm seeing more often now is regarding the balance between the security rating on a flat front door and the single action escape from the flat. Please, could you help?
Yeah, this is, you know, this you know, when we were talking about before about that there are other sets of performance criteria that may be applied to a door set or a door assembly. This is why Secure by Design pushed that dual scope certification down, is because there seemed to be the perception in the industry that, for example, oh, it's a fire door, so the fire performance overrules what the security requirement is, and it's never actually been the case. You know, if your door set is required to be security, fire, smoke, an easy means of escape, all those characteristics need to be applied to that door set. I am aware of some hardware solutions where the where the security can be retained whilst retaining an easy means of escape and the fire and smoke requirement. They're quite specific systems. When we put that sheet out later, Neil, I'm sure we can sort of potentially put the information out there.
Yeah, we're going to share resources around all the attendees. Thank you.
That's good, thanks, Neil. Sorry, Neil, just one last question for you. Tony, who is a door distributor, is asking how the new change in fire regs affects a door distributor rather than the manufacturer.
If we're talking about a distributor in the exact sense, and therefore a almost like a merchant, where a door leaf or even a door assembly is purchased and that company doesn't necessarily do anything with it, they just sell it on. I think with regards to the golden thread and things like that, it's just important that the manufacturer who sells to this distributor presents the information that they need to provide, and so long as the distributor retains that transfer of information, that should be happening anyway. I don't think door distributors in that sense actually they tend not to rebadge, they tend not to mess about with the manufacturer's information anyway. So yes, provided that there will be more emphasis on that. If you are selling a fire safety product, then yes, the correct information should be sent over. But I think that's happening in the most part as it is now anyway.
So as you point there, that if it's just passing through my hands as a product, I'm not adapting it or changing it, then that is a distributor. If I'm changing the size of the door, adding ironmongery and so on, changing it from how it arrived, is that you'd class that as different?
Yeah. If there was processing that had been carried out to a door by and who then goes on to distribute further, I suppose from my perspective, the preference would be they're certified to carry out those processes. And the certification that they subscribe to matches the certification that the door manufacturer subscribed to, and there's an arrangement between those two, between those two companies from that accommodates it. And so to be honest, if someone's processing a door like that, they then have to they have to present more information and move it on, with regards to how you install it, how you what processing goes on site, for example.
Good, thank you, Neil. Last and final question for the presentation, probably for Lucy, this one. It's from a guy called Kevin, who's in fire safety consultancy, and is asking what material changes will be made to the Rr Fso, which is the regulatory reform in brackets fire safety order 2005. Lucy.
So changes to the Rr Fso actually as a output of the fire safety bill and not the building safety bill. I think there's been a little bit of confusion with people thinking that they're the same thing. Ultimately, they're two separate bills, and the fire safety bill will come in first. Now, within the fire safety bill, ultimately they've redefined which parts of a residential premises fall within scope of the fire safety order. So prior to Grenfell and then post Grenfell, there was a bit of an argument that the external walls of the building and flat entrance doors didn't form part of the common parts and therefore should have been regulated by local authority housing, but now it's been redefined to say no, the external walls and flat entrance doors do form part of the common parts and therefore are in scope for the fire safety order. And what this means is that the fire risk assessment must consider the external wall and must consider the suitability of flat entrance doors specifically, and also that these obviously have to be compliant, and it gives the fire authority greater enforcement powers, specifically when dealing with cladding issues. I think that they was maybe struggling to enforce because it didn't necessarily fall in scope, and they brought this in to assist, and because we still have buildings out there that unfortunately do have the same cladding system as Grenfell, even though it's now been 3 years later.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Lucy, and thank you to all the panel for joining and all attendees. As mentioned before, we'll continue to share ideas with you all, and I hope you have a great day, and thank you again. Goodbye all.
Thank you.
Cheers, bye.
Bye.